welcome to Today in Woburn. I'm your host, Samantha Stone, and we have an incredibly jam-packed episode to talk about all the things that are happening preparing for school in the system. And I just want to kind of give a little bit of context before we jump in. In our discussion today, we're not going to talk about why decisions are made or how we got to the point that we're at. There have been an incredible transparency through the school committee and the staff at the office is trying to keep everybody as informed as possible. But we know there's a lot of outstanding questions that people have. So we're going to try and answer as many of them as we can to keep people abreast of what's happening and what's current and where we're going. And we know this is constantly evolving. So very much appreciate our Superintendent, Matt Crowley, and our head of our school committee, Ellen Crowley, completely unrelated to each other, for joining us today. And then before we get into school, so I don't forget, I want to let you know that I also got a little note from Bonnie at the library today that we're going to have some outdoor yoga coming on the library lawn. We might all need a little bit of that as we get ready for school. So the details of that is going to be happening shortly. And she sent me that note because if you recall, a couple weeks ago when we were out in the library, I had jokingly said, I think we should have that programming. I'd love to take credit for it. I'm sure it was in the works already, but hopefully we'll all be able to learn from that. Before we dive really deep into school business, I'd like to welcome Scott joining us again. Thank you for joining us today. I know we've just got a couple little things to catch up on before we jump into the school business with the fire department.
Yeah, if you just wanted a quick update on that, the city broke ground on the new fire station headquarters that are on a portion of Forest Park, which is right across from the Showcase Cinema. I think most people are familiar with that on Main Street. We broke ground on Tuesday, which is the site package. So they'll be preparing. The contractor was one of 8 bidders, so we had quite a few bidders out there. A healthy market out there. So the bidder was for the low responsible bid was for $695. Bids range from $695 to $1 million. This was the most responsible low bidder. They started their work, and if you've been up there, they have begun clear cutting 3.5 acres of trees on Forest Park, and that's a 35-acre parcel of land. So we went through the process to get 3.5 acres that was Article 97 turned into land so we could develop it. The remaining 32 are still protected Article 97. So, when people drive by there may be a little bit of a shock there because it's clear cut, but there's still 32 acres up there. And we're building a much needed state-of-the-art fire station for $23 million, which is long overdue. So that's my update. The groundwork should go until the end of November. Then we'll be bidding out documents early January for the actual building. And the building will begin construction end of March, beginning of April. But we're really excited. That's moving on. And, I think it's a great thing for not only the residents of this city for their protection, but also for the fire, the men and someday women of the Woburn Fire Department who work to protect our city. So
yeah, thank you for that update. I really appreciate that. I think many of us have noticed it. It's good to confirm that there are a number of acres that will still be protected. So it's not quite as drastic as it may look as we're driving by right now. So
that's right. And we did replace the 3.5 acres that we're using with open space in another part of the city. So that's my update. I know I'm looking forward to hearing the superintendent and the chairwoman from the school committee. And I know you've got a lot to go over. So if you don't have any other questions, I'll jump off, but we could certainly, I'm sure you can dedicate a lot more time to the fire station at some other point in one of your shows.
Absolutely. Let's have Fox over and let's talk about and celebrate that. Thanks for joining us, Scott.
You're welcome. Thanks, Samantha.
Bye, Mayor.
Bye.
So I'm gonna, Matt, I just want to sort of touch base with you very quickly first, and we'll kind of go back and forth. I've got a few questions, but I'll bounce back and forth a little bit between Matt and Ellen, so neither one of them gets a sore throat by the end of the discussion here today. There were some very important announcements that went out today around the start of school and also the hours that students would be in school moving forward in the hybrid model. Matt, I just want to give you the opportunity to just quickly summarize those for us.
I sent out a letter this afternoon to Woburn families, and a couple really important things to note. The first day for instruction for the Woburn Public Schools will be September 21st. It's a Monday, and that's as a result of the commissioner providing 10 days or 9 days of professional development to our staff, because we're going to come back in an entirely different way. And so that being said, our staff returns on September 8th, and so therefore our first day of instruction will be on the 21st. Before I get into the hybrid model a little bit, DESE has asked us, as maybe everybody already knows, but we had to create 3 different models: a full in-person, a hybrid model, and a full remote. And so the school committee voted to support the hybrid model, and so that's where we are as it relates to our opening. All students have been placed into cohorts, and for the elementary parents that requested a change, I believe you were notified today, and the middle and high school will be notified as soon as possible. The K-12 schools, all schools, will be providing in-person Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, Friday. Wednesday is a full remote for a deep clean. The release times are at 12 o'clock for the high school, 12:30 for the middle school, and 1 o'clock for the elementary schools. All students will have assignments to do in the afternoon when they get home, and it will also provide for, again, our teachers and staff to have professional development time, collaboration time, so that we're ensuring all students are getting the best education that we can provide, given the fact that we're in a hybrid model in a pandemic. And so I hope that that may answer some of the questions that people have as it relates to this. One of the things I comment and I say is that there's no such thing as a bad question, and there's no such thing as a really good answer right now. We're doing our best to meet the needs of all of our kids. And again, appreciate everyone's patience as we work our way through what really is a very difficult time for everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, Matt, I really appreciate that. I'm going to ask Ellen a question in a minute, but I just have one quick follow-up for you. When people have seen some of the announcement about the hours that are coming, and that there will be dismissals at different times across the day, it looks like remote education is intended to happen sort of immediately after that. And it doesn't appear that there's transportation time between the in-class instruction and when the afternoon remote instruction is meant to happen for hybrid students who will be physically in the classrooms. I'm sure that we're misreading what that is meant to be. So I just wanted to ask you for clarity about what that schedule is designed for.
The answer is we're trying to figure out, to the best of our ability, we're sample schedules that are pushed out right now. And one of the things that we don't know is how many students are going to actually take a bus. And so, for example, at the sample hybrid elementary schedule, the dismissals at 1 o'clock, the afternoon work doesn't occur to 1:30. So there's a 30-minute gap between the time students are dismissed and the time that they're expected to then continue on with their asynchronous independent work. And so I believe that it's a 30-minute window for transportation to occur at each of the levels.
Okay, thank you. That's great. I'm sure what I was looking at was a summary that didn't seem to have that. So that's good clarity. I'm going to come back to you and we're going to talk a lot about what that remote learning is going to look like for families to be able to prepare. Before we do that though, Ellen, I'd like to ask you a question. We continue to regularly get updates from DESE, and I would expect throughout the course of the fall term, we will continue to have new things happen. Some of what they present to us are mandates that all schools are required to follow. Some of it are minimum standards or guidelines or strong suggestions. How will we as a school system and the school committee determine how we'll respond to those upcoming things that are happening, and how will we be communicating those out to the community as they occur?
So the most important difference between a mandate and a guidance is the word regulation. The commissioner, because it's an emergency situation, the commissioner has the authority to promulgate emergency regulations. Regulations compel school districts to behave in a particular manner, and if they don't, then they're in non-compliance with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, which is the override regulatory agency that does have the authority to compel school districts and school districts administrators to do certain things. Guidance is simply, I believe, a well-intended guidance or advice to districts as how to handle certain situations. I believe that the commissioner in DESE is trying to uniformly address all the districts in the Commonwealth so that perhaps they can get on the same page with certain things. But there are certain laws that may, for instance, the regulation, the advice that came out about teachers being in classrooms, that's, in my opinion, I believe that that's something that should be collectively bargained with teachers as a change in their working conditions. So although it might, it was a piece of advice given to school districts as how you can fix this issue, or you could offer this as a service to the teachers that they can bring their kids into the buildings. I do think that there are other laws that are more important to consider, like collective bargaining.
Okay, thank you. That's really, really helpful.
Regulation.
Yeah, well, when we're, for all this, we read these things, we see them in the news, and it's hard to understand what is fact and absolutely being implemented in Woburn and what is not. And I have to commend the administration school committee. I know you're trying really, really hard, and the community at large knows that you're trying really, really hard to communicate things as they come up. But there's a lot of anxiety right now and a lot of uncertainty. And so I think people are impatient for our opinion on things. So thank you for helping, provide as much clarity as we can, as quickly as we can. One of the things that making people very anxious right now as looking ahead to what would be a scenario that would trigger an automatic all remote learning environment for Woburn? When would we decide to say, you know what, in-person learning has hit some threshold and we're gonna go all remote?
Is that for me?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's for you, Ellen, but feel free to bring Matt in if it's a more appropriate question for him.
So from my point of view, I think there are 4 major ways that we would convert to an all remote. The first is an executive order from the governor shutting all schools down in the Commonwealth due to a uptick of the coronavirus in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I do believe that the governor has the authority to do that. That would be it. We would probably convert to a remote model. 2 would be an emergency situation in Woburn in which the Department of Health / mayor would tell us that there's an uptick in Woburn or some sort of cluster that has people concerned about community transmission in the city of Woburn. That also could trigger a closure, which I think the superintendent indicated on the back to school plan. And I think he indicated some other notable triggers as well. The third is if a situation arose and the superintendent took it on his executive power to close the schools due to a safety issue. That could be with consultation with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and he has the authority to do that, just like he has the authority to do that on snow days for emergency to protect the safety of kids and staff. And lastly, I think that if we run into many logistics, impossible obstacles with running the hybrid plan, I do think that we will have to revert. And that would be if children that we didn't know wanted to work remotely now have their parents within their right, their DESE regulated right to choose a remote learning plan that might trigger an all remote, that we wouldn't be able to support a hybrid program if we had tons of children that wanted to do choice remote virtual learning academy. We also might run into staffing issues, and that doesn't mean an inability or a not wanting to work or anything like that. That just means that we might not have the availability of staff due to many different reasons.
Thank you for that.
4 things.
Thank you. Matt, I want to ask you a question. So it comes up quite a lot. I am a mother of a college student who is living on the residence, and every day I am getting a testing update, and they have a very rigid testing protocol. It's actually on my son's calendar every Wednesday at a certain time. He goes and gets tested. He gets different color wristbands depending on, to show his testing. It's unrealistic to do across an entire city and all of the people that are in it. But I raised that example because every day I get an update on the testing results. And I'll be honest, I'm not sure how helpful it is for me personally. It does raise my anxiety quite high, but it doesn't necessarily provide me the information to make any decision for my own student and my own child. And I'm not sure what the right answer is here, but I'd like to know what our policy is about communicating COVID positive or COVID suspected, either staff or students, that by classroom, by school, by district, what we will be communicating on a move forward basis.
So, first of all, I appreciate living with a college student who has to be tested. I share that with you. I'm hopeful. I'm hearing whispers that testing may be available to school districts. I think you might have seen that last week from the governor's office, that if there is a cluster, so to speak, they have a rapid response team that will come out and do local testing. So that's something there. My response to the overall, if there is a positive case, we need to take immediate action. And so what that includes is, based on the guidelines, all close contacts will be notified when a student or staff member is test positive. And close contacts are defined as being within 6 feet of an individual for at least 15 minutes while the person was infectious. And so all close contacts must be tested and self-quarantined for 14 days. So we will be very proactive to ensure that we're following all Department of Public Health and DESE guidelines as it relates to student and staff safety.
So if I have someone that is a close contact that I was in the classroom, it doesn't necessarily mean everybody in your classroom is going to be notified. People who are in your seating arrangement, you're going to be notified. Let's assume that I have been notified. I was sitting next to someone in a reasonable radius. You notify me. I have a sibling who goes maybe to a different school or the same school. Is a sibling required to quarantine and stay home for that 14-day period, or just the student who was directly exposed?
I would say that a sibling would also be identified as close contact because you're living within the same household, presumably.
Okay, thank you. That's what we wanted to confirm. I do think that there are a lot of questions about what the 6-foot guidance will be, and I'm sure as we start to do these things, but this is our current policy, so this is when you can expect to receive notifications. If a student is displaying symptoms in school, so they were not previously isolated or tested positive, or for any reason felt they shouldn't be in school, but in school they spike a fever, or they start to have some other kinds of scenarios, what will the actions be of the school to protect that student, the teachers, and the other classmates?
Sure. I'm going to give you my answer, but I will also tell you that each school and principal have a team, a building implementation team, working on the more specific information that will be provided to the families of each of the schools, because the answer will be slightly different at each of the schools. But based on the Department of Public Health and DESE guidelines and the Woburn Board of Health, the student ideally would be escorted to the medical waiting room that we are required by DESE to have until a parent or guardian could pick them up if they have COVID-like symptoms. If they scrape their knee, they would go to the regular nurse. That being said, the student can return to school after they've tested negative for COVID, have an improvement of the symptoms, and have been without a fever for 24 hours, at least 24 hours without any medication. If the student's not tested, they can return to school after 10 days, as long as the symptoms have improved and they've been without a fever for that 24-hour period. So the guidelines require us at this point to have a medical waiting room, and that will be slightly different, as I indicated, at each of the schools, but that would be separate from the nurse's office, and all of our nurses will have the appropriate PPE equipment so that they can work specifically with that student. All that to say, we will be sending guidance to families, because the reality is, if a student is not feeling well, they shouldn't come to school. And I know that people get sick in the middle of the day, but that being said, if a student has a fever, they shouldn't come to school. Same for staff. I mean, we need to be smart about what we're trying to do here. and protect ourselves and protect each other.
That actually brings up a question around substitute teachers. So substitute teachers often certainly move classroom to classroom, building to building in some cases. Given the dynamic situation that we're in, Matt, what, if anything, are we doing to address, they will be outside the cohort that is normally together?
Yeah, so what we've tried to identify, as Ms. Crowley alluded to earlier, are the staffing needs. But one of the things that we're going to try to do is provide building-based subs at each of the schools, so that rather than have a substitute teacher moving from itinerant from one school to another, each school would have at least one, probably two at the elementary and more at the middle and high school, so that the building-based sub would essentially be assigned to that building to fill the need.
Okay, great. I'm going to ask Ellen this question, even though, Matt, it's probably a question for you. I'm going to let you take a sip of water or whatever, and give you a little bit of a short break. Don't go anywhere. Ellen, for the schools have been preparing all summer to have a very variety of scenarios that we might be, moving towards, both at the beginning of the school year and also potentially further down into school year if things should change and evolve. I think it might be helpful for the community to understand what has been done for teachers to prepare, or staff to prepare, or all these things that are happening. Even the cleaning protocols are different, and checking the school ventilation systems, all those things. Not to belabor with a long list that I'm sure has been done, but in summary, I'd love to kind of get your perspective on that.
Well, I think the most important thing that we did, or the superintendent did with the full support of the school committee, is establish an infrastructure for crisis management. He established 3 subcommittees, and the 3 subcommittees broke down everything into tasks, looked at this situation from just about every single angle, from not just we passed a mask policy, but we also passed the subcommittee that was led by Dr. Baldessari also talked in depth about what to do when a child does not follow a mask policy, and what behavioral initiatives should be placed inside classrooms in order to reinforce the mask wearing, and also seeing that as an ADL, as something that is functional as part of a basic life skill. So everything was down to the nitty-gritty and the detail as to how to run the school system in the safest way possible. The task was, how can we do this and minimize the risk to health and safety for our staff and our students? And the answer is, place the desks far away, make sure that the teacher is not within 6 feet of the students, and provide the teacher with the resources necessary to keep herself safe, as it's mostly her, provide the PPE, provide the training, provide the instructors, the educators that work with kids closely with extra PPE, establishing policies around, mandatory mask wearing. But I mean, just about everything was looked into. I popped into a meeting once, and it was a 20-minute discussion on how to deal with the children's need for affection from kindergarten teachers, and how that's going to impact kids. So this was really hard work, and each subcommittee did it 3 times. Remote, this is what it would do in remote. This is what we would do in person, which was, I think everybody knew that in person was not feasible. And then this is what we would do in hybrid. And it was just this really in-depth child-centered discussion that happened all summer. But the key here is that the Woburn Public Schools had excellent leadership. And that's the key to all this, is that they had leadership, and they had community response, community initiatives, community involvement. I'm very proud to be a part of Woburn in this regard.
Thank you. Matt, question for you. If a family chooses the remote option and they want to go hybrid, when are they allowed to do that? When are they not allowed to do that? And the reverse, if I choose hybrid, but after X period of time, I'm uncomfortable with a scenario for some reason, do they have the option of moving to full remote?
The answer is yes. I believe it's embedded in the letter. The way that we're thinking about it, though, is that when you make a choice at the elementary level, you would be in that whatever choice you make for a trimester, and at the secondary levels for a semester, so that there's continuity of grading, so kids aren't toggling in and out. That's the idea. The specific dates escape me at the moment, but I believe it's the first 57 days maybe at the elementary and 85 at the secondary as a semester break. But the date, I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, great. Let's talk a little bit, Matt, about what so whether you're choosing hybrid or full remote, there's a lot of remote learning that's going to be happening for pretty much all students, because at best you're only in the school building for a couple of days a week, and then with some exceptions, I think, for some special needs environments that might be a little bit more. Who will be teaching me the remote days? So the days that my student is not in the school, but they're at home and in their hybrid learning environment, is it the same classroom teacher? Is it a different program? How is that going to work?
Yeah. Pardon me. At the elementary level, at the students are going to be with their classroom teacher for 3 days, because, 1 day virtually, right? So it's 2 days in, Wednesday's a virtual day. And then on Thursday, Friday, for example, in this situation, at the elementary level, we're putting together, we do have the ability to have, we have content specialists at each of the schools, Title I teachers, and we will have some teachers that are, that need to teach remote. And so on the days that the students are home, they'll be touched at the elementary school by those teachers. And then at the secondary, 7 to 12, similar idea as it relates to people being assigned independent, more recorded lessons through a DESE-provided Edgenuity program. That's a self-paced, facilitated platform that will provide feedback, etc. So somebody from the Woburn Public Schools will check in with these students daily to ensure that they are doing well and making progress. But I think to answer your question, is it the same teacher doing it in person and remote on the hybrid side? No, that is not how it's currently designed.
Okay. And if I am doing remote instruction and the opportunity to go back into a hybrid model is available to me, it's not, and I, within whatever the time frame is that I'm allowed to make that decision, I make that decision. Is my student placed in the cohort that they originally assigned, or is it likely that they will be, we probably don't know, right? Because it's going to depend on enrollment.
So enrollment and staffing are going to be the answer to that question. But we did assign everybody into a cohort for that reason, but we'll need to look at it as things unfold. Okay.
I think it might be helpful, Ellen, I'm going to ask you this question, but you may punt it to Matt, and I think that that's okay. So let me just say that there are a lot of people who are talking about homeschooling, and I think people are getting a little bit confused about what a guided helping my student through the remote learning option is, or versus I'm going to homeschool, which in effect means I'm going to withdraw my student from the school system and build my own curriculum and meet the requirements. Can you talk a little bit about if somebody is considering homeschooling, what do they need to be thinking about of what that really means?
So homeschool is essentially the equivalent of withdrawing your child and placing them in a private school, except you are the private school. You have chosen to teach your child within your own values, and that's your right to do, with your own values and your own education system that's in your home. That is a absolute legal right to do that. It's not remote learning. Remote learning is public school in your home. So you would still be a member of the public school, a student of the public school system, should you choose virtual academy. If you homeschool, you need to withdraw your child from the Woburn Public Schools, and you are responsible for the curriculum. You have to get approval essentially by the school committee, the administration acting on behalf of the school committee, so that we know that children are being educated, because we have mandatory attendance laws in Massachusetts. But you are the captain of your own ship, and what you need to report, I think, to the Woburn School Committee / administration updates on how your child's performing. And I think we have a specific policy. It's pretty well written, so folks could look to see what is required in our policy.
Thank you. I do think it's important to just make that distinction for people when I think
Yes.
the term is being thrown out and it means different things to different people, and we know it means something very specific to the academic system. So thank you for clarifying that.
Mm-hmm.
Matt, this is a question for you. One of the things that we expect will happen, because we have these dynamic staffing environments and we have lots of students learning in different ways and teachers who have different needs. Some are going to be in the classroom. There may be some set of teachers that needs to teach remotely for a variety of reasons. If an issue arises, if something needs to be addressed with school administration, are those teachers assigned to a specific school, and you would follow up with that principal like you would normally do, or is there a different mechanism in place for the remote working environment?
I would say that the teacher, if I follow the question, if a teacher's working remotely, for example, and was a teacher at the Harold Wyman Elementary School, generally speaking, and was teaching second grade remotely, and there was an issue with a student from the Malcolm White.
Yes.
Is that
That's an example of the scenario.
Yeah. So I would say you reach out to reach out to your home principal, and then they will collaborate with we have a great team, right? So in the scenario that I just described, we're all going to help each other and work together. So there's not going to be any gap of trying to help each other by principals with each other, and if need be, any assistant superintendent, myself, I understand the questions genuinely. There's so many hypotheticals that people are, we're trying to think through all these scenarios, but I'm really comfortable and confident in our teachers and our administrators to do right by the kids and the families.
Okay, great. And look, we're all trying to play out a million scenarios in your head, to your point, Matt, and that's going to be very challenging. But fundamentally, if you are working a remote option or hybrid option, and your child is struggling with something and you want to get some additional opinion, maybe you would have normally called the school's office and got directed to the guidance counselor if you have an older student, or to the school psychologist, or any of those things. It sounds to me, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, that you would do those services through what would normally be considered your home school, even if you're in a remote option. So you would reach out to whoever is associated with that.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
Great. All right. Thank you. How are we handling things like testing, right? So I know there are options to do some virtual testing. Some testing happened with students over the summer. Some are still waiting and pending. If a student has, like you would normally have your IEP meetings, or you have testing lined up, again, they're normally working through the normal channels of their home school system, and those folks would be reaching out to those families and coordinating that. Is that correct?
That is correct. And so
you may likely have a different looking virtual room that you have an IEP in, because you might have a remote teacher that is different than your primary teacher in some instances. So both of those people would be brought in to address any concerns. Is that correct?
That's accurate. And largely we're going to try to do as much testing and meetings virtually.
Okay.
I raise that because one of the things that's going to emanate from the building plans that will be a change is that you asked earlier about substitute teachers. Well, ordinarily our buildings are welcome. We want parents to come in. We want families to feel engaged. We have events for that exact purpose. Right now, that's not the plan. And so, it's a public safety measure. And so as many things as we can do virtually, we will, and hopefully we'll get really good at doing concerts virtually, or, meetings virtually with
get really creative, right, Matt? It might be helpful for us to understand, either over the summer or during this development time where teachers are prepping for this new environment, what are some of the things we're doing to help them get comfortable with remote teaching? It is very different than being in a classroom, right? There are different things that I need to be able to do to interact with my students through technology and through video than what most of them have been trained and practiced for many years. How are we setting up that training and the development to help make that transition?
Yeah, so the first 3 days of when teachers return is going to be predominantly technological training, PD. But I want to be careful. It's not going to be a full day of sitting and listening to or watching a video. I think we're trying to think about it from an application standpoint. So if you're a kindergarten or first grade teacher and you're going to be using Seesaw, there may be a 45-minute training, and then say, okay, for 45 minutes, go try to create your lesson, and we'll come back and, we'll toggle back and forth. One of the things that we learned in the spring was that, for example, Google Classroom is better suited for, grades 3 and above. So that's why we made the decision to flip platforms there. So Jen Judkins is our tech director. She is unbelievable. I would recommend having her on your show because she can add great clarity to the question, but also she's a professional trainer. So she's a Google certified innovator. She's one of 25 in the United States. We're so lucky to have her, and she's amazing. And so we're working through the details of what the training will look like, but the fact that she is doing training worldwide for people gives me confidence that we'll be able to deliver high quality, outstanding PD to our own staff.
I love it. Let's keep on the good news train. Ellen, this is a question for you. We did receive as a community grants and some funding to support our educational needs this year. Can you maybe just recap for us what that looks like and how we're using it?
So we got some money from the COVID relief fund in order to help us reopen schools, and reopen meaning get back to public education, whatever that may be. And it looks like I have a printout of what we spent it on. And it looks like we were using it for substitute teachers, some technology. But I have Dr. Baldessari printed them out for me, contracted services. But this is the type of grant that allows us to kind of spend where we see fit. But this is exciting. But I have the printout here, and the school committee oversees finance and spending just about every other week. So we'll be monitoring how this is spent. But obviously we'll go to COVID related costs associated with reopening schools and keeping kids safe, PPE, the whole thing. So that's what it looks like it was primarily spent on. Looks about 800,000 has been encumbered so far, classroom supplies, that type of thing. So that's all publicly available information. If anybody has any questions, they can contact the school committee. Probably be having a public meeting on it as well, since you asked. So that means that potentially people may be wondering what we're spending that on. So I'm happy to put that on as an agenda item.
Great. Well, I appreciate it. I think we're just pleased to see that we have an influx of some things to help offset some of the costs, obviously not all of them. Matt, let's talk a little bit about devices. So we know that we have also invested significantly to make sure that every student has a device. Will every student be required to use the school supply device, or can they use their own equipment?
The quick answer is, at this point, they can use, if they have their own device, they can use their own device. Our intent, as you indicated, is to provide every student a device, whether it's a Chromebook or an iPad, predicated on their age. I want to thank the city because they allowed us to purchase the Chromebooks and iPads. We placed our order back in June, or late June. And so that came directly from the city side and the CARES funding. So I want to acknowledge that we proactively made that move. The other thing, and you just asked about the grant, we did get a grant, a technology grant for about $140,000 and we're going to look to either enhance our device structure, purchase hotspots around the city so that people have access things of that nature. So we're looking to use grant funding as much as possible.
Great. Well, we love it. Lots of good ways to spend those grants. For students who are, the devices, I assume, but please correct me wrong, will be distributed for hybrid students in the classroom. Is that a safe assumption?
We haven't gotten there yet.
Okay. So, okay.
I can answer you. I mean, I would say that makes the most amount of sense, because there should probably be some training about how to use the devices, et cetera. This is,
Yep.
you walk through it. But we haven't gotten to that detail yet.
Okay. And for students who are on lunch programs and are not going to be in school every day, even under the hybrid model, how are we supporting their lunch needs on those days that they're home, and how are we doing it?
Bob Alcanada is our new Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations, and he's working with Lisa Tumayan, our food service director. And the quick answer is we will be providing lunch. We've been providing lunch all the way through the pandemic, starting right away in March. And we know the USDA just extended the waiver through September, so we'll continue to provide free lunch to all students. The mechanics, we believe something to the effect of students leaving on Tuesday would be provided lunch enough for the time that they would not be in school.
Okay. Thank you. That's helpful. A couple other things that have come up. One of the things that a remote environment, even the hybrid environment, must address is student privacy. Students and teachers, in some cases, will be working from their home environments. What will be our policy about having your video on, or people who maybe screenshot things or other types of behavior that would be maybe a little bit easier protecting the classroom, because you don't whip your camera out in the classroom, but it's pretty hard to control somebody taking a screenshot other than by policy. What thinking have we done around that?
I would tell you that we were very proactive in the spring relative to student data privacy. Jen Judkins, again, would be the person to have on the show to answer that specific question.
Or Jen, she's going to have to come on now. You just added that to her to-do list.
Yeah, she's going to love it. But I say that, for example, one of the things we do have is it's a program called BARC. And so when students are on the Google platform, if they're using the Google platform provided by the Woburn Public Schools, if there's certain keywords that trigger an email to administrators that may or may not have to be reacted to, so for example, when students at the high school are researching the Holocaust, that triggers a lot of emails, but then you figure out that they're researching something. So, but it is an area that we are aware of, and we'll monitor closely.
Okay. I think you answered this earlier, but I'm not sure I asked it in a completely clear way, and I have several questions that came in around it, so I want to re-ask the question. Teachers who are teaching remotely, will they be teaching students outside? I think I heard you say they will be teaching a subject area, or and it may be students outside their normal school system. So students from the Malcolm White might have a teacher from the Lynn Scott. I'm blanking on another name, right? That would be teaching them, but will they be teaching their normal subject areas? Will teachers be, if they're a math teacher, will they normally be teaching math? If they're a second grade teacher, will they be teaching second grade? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, the intent is, well, two things. One is yes to your question. So the Malcolm White teacher that may be teaching remote, fourth grade, for example, would be probably teaching students from more schools than just the Malcolm White. There's a staffing reality that we have to face. That being said, you talked about subject specific. DESE did provide some guidance surrounding teaching outside of your license. So typically, if you're a math teacher, you can only teach outside your license 20% of the time. It's now 50% of the time. It doesn't mean that that's the best fit. It just means that it provides flexibility for people that may be dual certified or as needed to fill a void.
Okay. And what about specials, things like art and music and physical education? Are those going to be taught in part of the in-person time in the hybrid environment, or are those exclusively done remotely?
So it's going to depend on the level. At the middle and high school, it's the intent is to have it done in person. And at the elementary level, it's going to be remote because the specialists at the elementary level travel. And so for the same reason, substitute teachers would be assigned to a building. We want to try to minimize the, for public safety, the itinerant teachers.
Okay, that's very, very helpful. I'm just looking through my questions. I want to make sure I don't miss any of the things that are really important. Let's talk about transportation. So one of the things that is, we have guidelines about where to sit and what to touch and to have your mask on. We also know that buses aren't always the place that students always follow the rules very strictly. And that bus drivers, of course, have to watch the roads and take care of road safety. And so there's a lot sometimes that they don't see or are unable to respond to. Are we doing anything in terms of bus monitoring or other types of behavior modification or anything to manage what's likely to be a challenging situation on buses?
So I agree with the idea that it's definitely going to be a challenge. Again, two-part answer. Special ed vehicles usually have monitors on them, just as practice. For the regular school buses, that we will be assigning seats, and the intent is to potentially provide opportunity for some perhaps paraprofessionals to be a monitor on these buses. One of the things that we don't know, that's part of the letter that went out today, is who is actually going to be taking a bus, because in past surveys, we've seen that ridership was going to be down quite a bit. And so we need to identify who's going to be taking the bus and then align our bus stops accordingly. And so I would ask people to fill that out so that we can plan.
Okay. One of the other things that I may be mistaken, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but what I understand is with the change in hours at the elementary level, one of the things that does is it's a grab and go lunch. They're not eating in the school building on the days that they're in that environment. That may in fact be a very long day for some students to go without lunch, particularly those who maybe aren't great about eating breakfast or don't have breakfast at home for whatever reasons. Does that mean we're having a different snack schedule, or can you just tell us a little bit more about how we help ensure that the minds can focus?
Sure. So specifically, and I understand the question because I get hungry mid-morning. So we have to build in a mask break and a snack break. So it's 9:45 to 10 at the elementary is the samples break time for snack and mask. And then again at 11:15. So, we will do our best to ensure that students have an opportunity to both take the break with the mask and have snack.
Okay. And will those snacks be provided for those students who are on a free lunch program, or are they required to bring it?
We will provide.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about school supplies. One of the other things, because every store is getting us anxious because they're putting sales on now and nobody knows what to get because nobody knows where they're going. So can you provide some guidance on when school supply lists or things we already know should be expected, either in the class, for your classroom, or people are going to be learning from home for many hours at home. Are there things we should have guide parents to collect, or will the school be sending supplies home with students in that hybrid environment?
So it's a combination of both. One of the things you talked about earlier with Ms. Crowley about the grant. So for example, we're going to be sending science kits home, etc. So there's some things that the school will be providing that will go home, which is different and will be paid for out of a grant because it's clearly COVID related. But schools will also be sending, as part of the back to school plan, things that a school supply list that families can, we're not going to be able to provide every single item that a student would need to come back to school, but we're going through the process right now. And as I talked about earlier, the building implementation teams are working through these details, and they'll be embedded in that correspondence direct from the school.
Okay. One of the other I think I will honor our time together, and I'll ask you one more question, and then I'll ask each of you to just make any final remarks that you'd like to let the community know about. This last couple of weeks before school, a lot of times people are taking their vacations. Now, vacations don't look like anything like they normally do for anybody right now, and we fully recognize that. But are we asking staff to do anything unusual in terms of if they go away, are we asking them to produce a test? Are we asking people not to go away? Or is there any guidance that we're giving any staff members, not just teachers? This applies to anybody who would be working in the schools.
The quick answer is no, we're not. But I say that with the caveat that, the governor has a travel order effective August 1st. So if you're going into a state that's higher risk, you have to fill out the mass travel form, and when you return, you either quarantine for 14 days or produce a negative result. So, we're working in conjunction with the state and the Woburn Board of Health on this, and to the best that we can to keep everybody safe.
Good. Ellen, before we wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like the community to know?
No, I just, when I looked at the schedule that went out today, or the letter that went out today, and I just want to remind families that it's not like your child gets home and then they have to get back on the computer again. The work that's done in the elementary school afternoon is going to be asynchronous. So when the child can go home, can reattach to the family, and then they can do the activity. We just wanted to make sure that parents understood that their child is getting a full day of public education. Even if the activity itself is done under the supervision of the parents assigned by the teacher. I wanted to note that. But I really just wanted to thank the public for, we had a public hearing and people spoke, and they spoke very eloquently. It's a very emotional issue. But I was really proud of the way in which people communicated to the school committee. We are under tremendous pressure. And the leadership is doing an excellent job, but I am just very grateful that people were compassionate, patient, kind, respectful, and because that's the way that Woburn is. And I've gotten so many emails that just said, hey, this sucks, but good luck. Just people are really good, and I think even in all of this, of what's going on, it just shows that it does bring out the best in people, that that we're all going to get through this and is going to be okay. And Dr. Crowley sent out a big letter today. People are going to have a lot of questions, and I know it's going to provoke a lot of anxiety, but we are doing the best we can to eliminate and reduce a lot of the unknowns for people. And I just, I want to just say thank you.
Yeah, thank you for Ellen. I did get an opportunity to listen into that public hearing meeting that you're referencing, and I was actually really impressed. There was a lot of different opinions and a lot of strong points of view, and I thought everybody was really respectful. And for the most part, when people are sending me questions, they're also saying, and let them know we know this is hard, right? And I know that may not be at an individual level what a teacher is going to experience or a staff member is going to experience when it comes down to brass tacks of our students and their struggles and their challenges. And hopefully there's celebrations also, but I do think that everybody's working really, really hard and trying to get to all the answers. And we know things move, right? The dates move. So we announced the date because everybody wanted to know the date, and then we had to move the date. And that's frustrating. And that's frustrating for everyone, including all of your staff and all of the teachers and all the students and all the families. But like always, I think we just try and be here for each other and do that. Matt, Ellen's answer did bring up one other question for me, and that is the role of homework in this model. So homework is typically done to reinforce what is practice, what I learned in the classroom during the day. I imagine much of the remote learning will be homework-like in terms of anything that's asynchronous, but will students be expected to do more? I know there's like guidance that says certain number of hours per day for a first grader or a middle schooler or a high schooler in terms of homework. It's sort of it's hard to know what's homework and what's remote learning. What guidance are the schools providing in terms of that?
We haven't gotten there yet, to be honest with you.
That's fine. Okay.
I
Yep,
mean,
that's a completely fair answer. You know, frankly, the fact that you had answers to most of my questions today is a little bit of a miracle. So I understand.
I feel like we're drinking out of a fire hose.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think that students will be provided a ton of opportunities at home to continue their learning because we have different platforms that we'll be able to provide to them. Now, will it be mandatory the way that, you know, if you were to be in school every day and you bring your homework back every day? Maybe not, but the access to curriculum will be more robust probably than it ever has been.
Right. Is there anything else, Matt, that you'd like the community to know before we let you go today?
Well, no, I say it in my letters all the time, and Ellen captured it really well. We're doing our best to try to meet the needs of all of our kids in the midst of a public health crisis. And I appreciate the emails of encouragement, but also of, you know, of questions, right? So there's anxiety for everybody, parents, students, staff. And so, you know, and myself, I mean, we're open to feedback, and we need to be flexible in our thinking. And the word pivot is used quite a bit these days, but to try to pivot to the best model to meet the needs of all of our kids and families. And so, please know that we're working hard to try to do that.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's a really good reminder, you know, we see the student interaction quite a lot, but the role of the administration, of the janitorial staff, of the cooking staff, of the nurses, I mean, the demands on the nurse, you know, are, for example, are going to be exponentially higher, I imagine, in some ways than we might normally be, because they're going to be having to check for different kinds of symptoms. They're going to be having to address anxiety and concern in students and such. So, you know, thank you for all the hard work. Thank you, Woburn, for tuning in and listening. Hopefully we've given you some answers to some of the questions that you asked. We know we don't have answers to everything, but the school will continue to communicate, and Matt and Ellen are always welcome on the show to give us updates. We'll have a technology update hopefully soon as well. And I think, you know, just continue to take care of each other, continue to ask the questions, and we'll continue to try and respond as best possible. Thank you for watching.